The Baltic Sea in April is not a hospitable body of water. It is cold, it is gray, it is shallow enough that the acoustic and navigational picture is permanently complicated, and it is bordered by nations that have been having geopolitically consequential arguments with each other for approximately 800 years. Since February 2022, it has also become, by any reasonable measurement, the most diplomatically pressurized body of water in Europe. Sweden and Finland join NATO. The Russian Baltic Fleet's freedom of maneuver has been geometrically compressed by the expansion of the alliance's maritime boundary. The Kaliningrad exclave sits between Poland and Lithuania, like a splinter in NATO's hand. Every American naval transit of these waters carries a weight that transits elsewhere do not carry, because every American naval transit of the Baltic in 2024 is, in the specific vocabulary of great power signaling, a sentence about who controls what and under which rules. USS Porter, DDG-78, an Arleigh-Burke flight, 2A destroyer commissioned in 1999, is making 14 knots on a northeast heading in the central Baltic, approximately 40 nautical miles southwest of the Swedish island of Gotland. She has been in the Baltic for 6 days. She is here because the United States Navy goes where it chooses to go in international waters, and the Baltic Sea is international waters, and the presence of a U.S. Navy destroyer in the central Baltic is a sentence that the alliance and its adversaries both understand without needing it translated. Her position, her course, and her identity have been known to Russian Baltic Fleet surveillance since she transited the Danish Straits. This is not a surprise deployment. It is a deliberate one. USS Porter is the sentence. The question is what the response will be. The response arrives at 1438. At 1438, the SPY-1D radar returns an airborne contact from the east, bearing 085, range approximately 65 nautical miles, altitude transitioning from medium to low, speed approximately 620 knots and accelerating. The system classifies it within 4 seconds. Su-24M Fencer, Russian Aerospace Forces, Kaliningrad District. The track geometry is direct. The contact is not transiting. It is not conducting a search pattern. It is pointed at USS Porter on a course that the Aegis combat system has extrapolated to an intercept in approximately 6 minutes at the current closing rate. The tactical action officer has the contact report before the classification is finalized. He picks up the internal comms handset. His voice is level. It is the voice of a professional who has seen this particular type of contact report before, who knows what it means, and who is going to manage it with the same procedural competence that everything else gets managed with. Bridge combat. I have a fast air contact bearing 085, 65 miles, closing fast, Su-24 classification. Recommend we get the watch alert. The officer of the deck acknowledges. He looks at the radar repeater. He looks at the contact's geometry. He picks up his coffee. It has been on the bridge warming plate since 1300 and has passed through every stage of Baltic deployment coffee. Hot, acceptable, warm, and is now in the specific amber twilight that experienced watch officers learn to consume without complaint because there will not be a better option for some time. He drinks it. He makes a note in the deck log. He monitors the contact. Here is what makes the next 4 minutes the most carefully managed 4 minutes of USS Porter's Baltic deployment, and here is why they matter in a way that goes beyond the single aircraft inbound from Kaliningrad. USS Porter is positioned approximately 40 nautical miles southwest of Gotland. Gotland is a Swedish island. Sweden joined NATO in March 2024. The waters around Gotland are, as of that accession, alliance waters in the political and strategic sense, even if the legal framework of the high seas continues to apply. 40 nautical miles southwest of Gotland puts USS Porter in international waters, but in international waters that carry a specific weight in the current environment. To Porter's north, the shipping lanes between Sweden and the Baltic states are operating at normal commercial density. To her south, approximately 55 nautical miles, lies the border of what Russia considers its exclusive maritime interest zone in the central Baltic. To her east, at varying distances, are the assets of the Russian Baltic fleet that have been tracking her since the Danish Strait transit. The rules of engagement for this deployment have been reviewed, updated, revised, and reviewed again at every level, from the ship's commanding officer through Navier and ultimately through channels in Washington that do not appear on any publicly available organizational chart. The ROE are specific, layered, and carefully calibrated to the current operational environment. They permit self-defense. They permit active countermeasures. They do not permit engagement of a Russian military aircraft conducting a provocative but non-kinetically hostile approach in the Baltic Sea in April 2024, because engagement of a Russian military aircraft in the Baltic Sea in April 2024 is a sentence with consequences that nobody in the diplomatic and strategic chain of command wants to write. The tactical action officer is operating inside this framework. He has read the ROE. He knows exactly where the lines are. He is going to manage this approach within them, and he is going to collect everything the SLQ-32 can collect while he does it, because collecting everything is what USS Porter does every minute of every day, regardless of what else is happening. The Su-24 reaches 40 nautical miles at 1441. It is now at approximately 200 feet altitude, low enough that the radar horizon geometry is compressing the SPY-1D's tracking quality slightly at this range, which is the point of flying low, which is why the Fencer was designed for low-level penetration in the first place, which is something everyone in the Combat Information Center is aware of, and none of them find alarming, because the SPY-1D's tracking quality at this range against this contact type is still several orders of magnitude better than the Su-24's crew's ability to do anything about it. The vulnerability window is not about the hardware. The vulnerability window is about the geometry, the political architecture, and the specific Swedish archipelago off the port bow that introduces a navigational constraint on USS Porter's maneuvering options at exactly the moment the aircraft's approach geometry is peaking. USS Porter is at 14 knots. The Swedish island of Oja, the southernmost of the Stockholm archipelago's outer islands, is approximately 38 nautical miles to the northwest. Between Porter and Oja, the bathymetry shoals from 75 meters to less than 20, in a shelf pattern that the navigator has been monitoring since the ship entered this operating area 6 hours ago. Porter cannot turn northwest without entering increasingly constrained water. She can turn south, which opens water but closes the distance toward the Russian maritime interest zone. She can turn east, which closes toward the contact. She can continue northeast, which is her current course, which maintains favorable water depth and acceptable geometry. The commanding officer, who joined the watch at 14:39, 30 seconds after the contact appeared on his cabin repeater display, has reviewed the bathymetric chart and made his decision before he reached the bridge. They are going to hold course. They are going to manage the approach within the ROE. They are going to collect everything. The Su-24 reaches 20 nautical miles at 1443. It is at approximately 150 feet and has not altered its approach course since it was first acquired. The SPY-1D is tracking it with the unbroken attention of a system that considers this the most routine thing it has done today, which is accurate because the most routine thing the SPY-1D does is exactly this. The SLQ-32 has been active since the contact appeared and has been collecting the Su-24's emission profile since first acquisition. The Fencer carries a suite of electronic warfare equipment, including the Khibiny-M pod, and the Khibiny-M has been transmitting since approximately 1440, which means the SLQ-32 has had 4 minutes of close-range Khibiny-M emission data by the time the aircraft reaches 20 miles. The Khibiny-M's emission profile is in the threat library. What is not fully characterized in the existing entry is the Khibiny-M in its active jamming configuration during a low-altitude, high-speed approach profile against a specific Aegis configuration. Tonight's collection is filling that gap. Every second the Su-24 spends on this approach is a second of data that the threat library did not have at 1438. Khibiny is active, the electronic warfare officer reports at 1443. with the tone of a person confirming something expected. Mode consistent with active jamming against surface radar. No effect on tracking. He marks the timestamp. The frequency agility is running a new pattern on the upper band. That is different from the April collection. He marks the variation. I am logging it as a potential software update indicator. The variation is in the upper portion of the Khibiny-M's frequency agility range. Software update, or operator configuration. The distinction matters to the analysts who maintain the Khibiny-M threat library entry. The data goes into the collection log. The tracking continues without interruption. The Su-24 reaches 5 nautical miles at 1445. 5 nautical miles is close. At 150 feet and 620 knots, a Su-24 at 5 nautical miles fills the windscreen in a way that is physically present rather than merely represented on a radar display. The lookouts on the bridge wings of USS Porter can see it. One of them is a petty officer second class from the Navigation Division who has been on watch since 1200 and who has observed many things in the Baltic Sea over 6 days that did not make the official log. The Su-24 is the most interesting thing he has observed, and the observation lasts approximately 7 seconds before the aircraft passes overhead, at an altitude that the petty officer will later estimate as uncomfortably close, and that the deck log will record as approximately 150 feet. He watches it go past. He watches it bank right, climbing. He looks at the wake it leaves in the gray April air over the central Baltic. Then he turns back to his navigation watch duties. Because the navigation watch duties do not stop because a Russian aircraft just overflew the ship, and the Baltic Sea does not care about the excitement. The Su-24 makes 3 passes. The first, at 1445, at approximately 150 feet. The second, at 1451, at approximately 300 feet, on the port beam at a wider lateral offset, 600 yards rather than directly overhead. The third, at 1457, at approximately 400 feet. A wider arc that takes the aircraft around the ship's stern at about 800 yards. The passes are decreasing in proximity and intensity. This is a standard RFAS harassment profile. Establish presence close, then demonstrate sustained presence at decreasing intensity. The crew is professional. The maneuvers are deliberate. The SLQ-32 is collecting through all 3 passes, building a continuous picture of Khibiny-M emission behavior across approach, overflight, and departure geometry. A dataset that close-range standoff collection cannot produce, and that direct observation at this range provides in real time. During the second pass, the electronic warfare officer makes the observation that will end up in the first paragraph of his collection report's executive summary. The Khibiny-M switched modes between the first and second pass, he says, reviewing the emission record. Mode 1 on approach, Mode 2 during the lateral pass. Mode 2 is a different jamming architecture. Broader coverage, lower power density. It is consistent with a software selectable dual-mode configuration that the existing library entry describes as theoretical. He pauses. The pause is the professional pause of someone confirming that a theoretical entry has just been confirmed empirically. It is no longer theoretical. He marks the timestamp, the mode transition, the frequency parameters, and the power levels. The entry goes into the draft report. The dual-mode confirmation is the most operationally significant single datum collected in the Baltic this deployment, and it was provided by an aircraft that flew 3 passes over USS Porter, in the belief that proximity was the point. Proximity was not the point. The SLQ-32 was the point. At 1458, the Su-24 sets course back toward Kaliningrad. The SPY-1D maintains tracking as the contact recedes. The electronic warfare officer continues collecting through the departure. The Khibiny-M remains active during withdrawal, and the withdrawal emission profile is itself a dataset that the library entry benefits from having. The contact clears the 50 nautical mile range at 1507. The SLQ-32 flags the collection period as complete. The electronic warfare officer begins formatting the report. The collection report runs to 29 pages. The executive summary leads with the dual mode, Khibiny-M confirmation. The existing threat library entry for the Khibiny-M has a theoretical note about dual mode capability that dates to an analytical assessment from 3 years ago, based on Soviet-era design documents and a single ambiguous intercept from a Baltic collection mission in 2022. Tonight's data is not ambiguous. It is a direct measurement of both modes, sequentially, with full emission parameters, from an aircraft that flew close enough to the ship that the bridge lookouts watched it go past. The theoretical entry becomes a confirmed entry. The confirmed entry changes the operational planning picture for every ship in the Aegis fleet, because Mode 2's broader coverage affects the countermeasures architecture in a specific way that the theoretical entry could only estimate. The estimate was conservative. The actual numbers are less favorable than the estimate. The collection report notes this. The collection report recommends a specific review of the countermeasures parameters for the Khibiny-M Mode 2 profile. The review will happen. It will change something. That something came from 3 passes over USS Porter at 150 feet in the Baltic Sea in April. The cost of the operation, from the Russian perspective, is aviation fuel and crew time. The strategic theory of the operation is presence. Demonstrate that Russian long-range tactical aviation can reach and overfly an American destroyer in the central Baltic. Communicate willingness to operate in close proximity to NATO vessels in alliance-adjacent waters. Generate footage for the operational record and potentially for information operations. The theory is not unreasonable. The presence was demonstrated. The overflight happened. USS Porter continued on her course without altering. The footage was taken. What the operational theory did not account for was that the aircraft demonstrating presence was simultaneously conducting the most productive single-platform Khibiny-M collection event in the SLQ-32 program's Baltic operational history. The dual mode confirmation. The upper band frequency agility variation. The emission behavior across approach, overflight, lateral pass, and withdrawal geometry. All of it collected at ranges that the aircraft's crew was specifically choosing to provide for reasons that had nothing to do with signals intelligence and everything to do with making an impression. The impression was made. The collection was also made. These two things happened simultaneously. The report is transmitted at 1614. Navar receives it at 1614. The relevant desks at the intelligence community receive it at 1617. The Khibiny-M threat library update is in draft by 1645. The update will be distributed to the Aegis fleet, to the electronic warfare programs of allied navies that operate in the Baltic and North Sea environments, and via established channels to the air forces of 3 NATO member states that have encountered the Khibiny-M in recent intercept operations and have been waiting for exactly the dual-mode confirmation that tonight's collection provides. Now let us address what Russian media said happened. The Russian Ministry of Defense issued a statement at 1800 Moscow time. The statement described a planned training flight by aircraft of the Russian Baltic Fleet aviation component in the central Baltic Sea, conducted in strict accordance with international aviation law. It noted that the flight path took aircraft near an American naval vessel that was operating in the region. It did not describe the distance. It described the operation as routine. This is, by the standards of the form, a restrained response, which is itself informative, because the most aggressive claims in Russian military communications tend to accompany the most aggressive-looking operations. And describing 3 passes over a destroyer in the Baltic as a routine training flight suggests that the information operations value assigned to this particular mission is limited. The overflight happened. The Ministry of Defense noted that the overflight happened. The framing is factual and neutral in a way that implies the operational goals of the mission were, by the standards of Russian strategic communication, only partially met. The second account, from a defense affairs correspondent for a state-affiliated outlet, described the flight as evidence of Russia's continued operational capability in the Baltic despite NATO's enlargement. This is accurate. Russia can still fly the Su-24 from Kaliningrad to the central Baltic. The Su-24 made 3 passes. The point was made. What the correspondent did not report, and could not have known, was the electronic warfare officer's note about Mode 2 at 1451, time-stamped, measured, confirmed, and currently accelerating through the fleet's countermeasures review process. The correspondent reported a demonstration. The SLQ-32 operator reported a confirmation. Both are accurate descriptions of the same 3 passes. One of them changes the operational planning picture. The petty officer who watched the Su-24 go past at 150 feet during the first pass is eating dinner in the ship's mess at 17:30. The Baltic outside the porthole is gray and cold. He is eating something that the galley describes as chicken, and that he is describing to his table mates in somewhat more specific terms. He is also describing the Su-24, the shape of it, the sound of it at 150 feet and 620 knots over the Baltic, the way it banked right after the overflight, the 7 seconds of looking up at the underside of a Russian tactical aircraft from the bridge wing of a U.S. Navy destroyer in the central Baltic Sea. He describes this well. He has a talent for it. His table mates are interested. None of this will appear in the official record. The official record will say, Su-24 3 passes, minimum altitude approximately 150 feet. No hostile action. Collection results significant. The petty officer's description will circulate in the mess for the remainder of the deployment with the informal precision of a good sea story, which is to say, imprecisely but vividly, which is how sea stories work and how they should work. Aboard the bridge, the officer of the deck is making his final log entry for the watch period. The entry is clinical. Airborne contact Su-24M, 3 passes. Minimum lateral separation 600 yards. Minimum altitude, approximately 150 feet. No hostile action. No deviation from planned course. Intelligence collection, significant. He looks at his coffee. It is cold beyond recovery. He sets it down. He logs the watch as complete. The Baltic is gray outside. The sun will not set for another 3 hours because it is April, and this is the Baltic, and the days are getting longer, in the specific way that means the light stays longer than the warmth. 14 knots northeast. The Swedish archipelago is off the port bow, exactly where the navigator said it would be. Everything is where it is supposed to be. The 29 pages are in 5 inboxes. The dual-mode confirmation is in the Threat Library Update draft. The upper band agility variation is flagged for the software update assessment team. The Khibiny-M entry will be revised by the end of the week. The Su-24 is back at Kaliningrad. The Baltic is cold and gray and entirely normal at 17:30 in April, which is to say, it is precisely as it has always been. And USS Porter is proceeding northeast through it at 14 knots as if 3 passes at 150 feet were a Tuesday afternoon, which, for a crew that has been doing this for 6 days, they very nearly are. Bye for now.